Hey, this week on the 167, we're going to be talking about the story of Moses and identity and how that can get us out when we feel stuck. Welcome to the 167.
1, 2, 3, let's go!
Hey, welcome back to the 167. For some reason, we're all humming "'Tis So Sweet to Trust in Jesus." We're syncing up mentally. I love it. Like it's just like we're pre-gaming with that little hymn action. But I'm joined here by Pastor Rick George.
Good morning.
And Carissa Motley.
Good morning.
And so we are also joined by you, our listeners and watchers. So, hey, how are you doing? But we're talking about the series I'm Stuck, or I Feel Stuck, Part 2. Part 2. And so this week we were talking about Moses and feeling stuck, and what do we do when we have to feel like we're stuck in guilt and shame. And so I wanted to kind of kick it off and just talk a little bit about Moses' story. So Moses gets brought up quite a bit. He's a large figure in Christianity and Judaism, and honestly, Islam. I mean, like Moses is predominant through a lot of world religions. But when we talk about the story, what are always the things that stand out to you about Moses' story and the times that he gets stuck, or, you know, like when you're thinking about his story in that lens?
I mean, for me, there's just a lot of relating to him in that when you look at Moses' life, you look at a guy who had everything. It's like the lap of luxury, and then because of something stupid, like his whole life spun on a dime, and like now he's off and running. And I just look back over my life and think, how many times have like I sabotaged my own life? Not intentionally, but just everything was pretty good, and then, well, I wasn't satisfied with that. I have to go and get in the middle of something that I shouldn't have gotten in the middle of, or I did something I know I shouldn't have done, or said something, and it just, everything changed. So, so I can relate with Moses, but just looking at the number of times when he just made some really bad decisions.
I think it's interesting when I think about Moses is that he's a lot older than I think about, right? So when he kills the Egyptian, he's 40, right? He's 40 years old. So fun fact, Lucas and I are in our early 40s. So he's early 40s.
In that,
so, you
that
know,
range.
He's like roughly my age when that happens. And to think about, I think the Prince of Egypt screwed me up on this, right? Growing up with that movie. But he's not a young man, really. He's not, he shouldn't be.
I mean, he's pretty young.
He should.
Super young.
I know what you meant to say.
You knew what I meant. So he's not like the age where you would go, oh, he's just being impulsive, or, you know, he should be an adult, right? He should be capable of like making adult decisions. And so he does this crazy thing where he kills the Egyptian, buries him in the sand, and then he just runs away. And I'm looking at that going, that's, as a 40-year-old, that's kind of a big, like that's just a big thing to have that happen in your life. And then the other thing that always strikes me about Bible stories is how, you know, how long everything takes. So he's 40 when that happens, and then he's in the wilderness for 40 years.
Then he's
in
80.
Then he's 80 before God calls him to come back and free the people of Israel. And I always feel convicted by that, by the story of Abraham and Sarah, you know, how old they were. And I, you know, when I'm impatient with things in my life, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, God didn't call Moses in the burning bush till he was 80 years old. That's kind of a long period of time to grow and develop.
Like, I'm retired.
Yeah, well, so
Right.
So as I look at that part of the story and think, okay, I'm in my really early 60s.
Early.
You know, so
Late 40s.
Yeah.
That's what I heard.
And I mean, even in my mindset, like most people, when you hit 60, I mean, you start thinking differently. I mean, you can see the finish line kind of like, okay, I can't keep doing what I've been doing. My body doesn't do like everything changes.
Yeah.
And so you start thinking like, what does it look like to wind down? Yet like in that phase of Moses' life, like he still had 20 years of hard work,
Right.
like out in the fields, tending sheep,
Right.
working for someone else. And then
Yeah.
God says, all right, now I have something for you to do. And I'm
Right.
thinking, oh my gosh.
And then
You
he
know?
does like his biggest thing
Yeah, when he's 80.
in his 80s, and then he's in the desert for 40 more
I was
years,
gonna say,
right? Like,
imagine being 80 and he's like, yes, this is it, the pinnacle. I've brought the children to the promised land. It's like, God's, you're gonna have to wander in the
Yeah,
wilderness for 40 more years.
you've
It's
got
like,
40 more years. Yeah. That's, that.
So maybe the question should have been, do you think Moses' favorite number is 40?
I don't know.
I
Man.
don't think so.
No,
He's
he probably
"No,
hates it.
I hate
Lord,
40.
40 more years.
You know he's up in heaven and Jesus makes that joke all the time. He's like, Jesus, when's the next worship time? 40 more years, Moses. How long is eternity? Oh, just 40 more years.
Not funny, Jesus. Not
Not
funny.
funny.
Well, I think too. I'm like, I like what you're talking about. You know, what does he feel in this moment of guilt and shame when he kills this Egyptian? The thing that always fascinates me is that it seems to indicate that he knew, like that he, at some level, I don't know if they just told him that, you know, straight out of the gate, like, yeah, we found you in the river, and it was the craziest thing. You know, like we recognize that you are a Hebrew, and like, what would that be like to feel stuck where you were, you know, you live up in the, you know, the palace and you're too rich and powerful to be considered one of the people, and yet you're with this group of people that, well, you're a Hebrew, so we hate you. And it's like, it would be this kind of stuck feeling, and you kind of feel that where it's like, yeah, for 40 years that has probably built up. He probably tried to prove himself. I have, you know, my imagination, all this stuff, and it's just like going, and then finally he's like, I'm going to prove it to my people that I am one of them by killing this dude.
Yeah.
You know, like, and I don't know if he's going to start a revolt or whatever he's going to do, but it's like, you know, and when he does that, they're like, we don't accept you. You know, like, what, you know, you're a ruler. Like, we don't, you know, like, are you going to rule over us? Like, and just to feel like you cannot win. And so much so that he has to flee both of those worlds.
Yeah.
I think it's crazy.
Yeah, so I don't know if it was, you know, really part of his thought process of, you know, trying to prove himself, but I'm sure that there was some tension. Like, this is who I am, like, and I was rescued, but then this is who I've become. Like, now this is the new me, the old me. How do those two things come about? And they're wrestling with that identity, and and then trying to, I don't know. I think part of the problem is he just tried to fix everything by himself.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
I can do this, and
Yeah.
you're fighting. I'll step in and I'll solve it. And
Right.
Well, and when he says that he goes out and he sees how cruelly the people are being treated, like, how do you reconcile that with the love of your mother? You know, like the love of your adopted mother, who's Pharaoh's daughter, and watching this go down.
Yeah. So there's a lot of tensions. That's why I said, hey, just read it.
Yeah.
And if you just read the story like on the surface, and you're like, okay, this, but when you take the time to look at those relational tensions and just all the nuances of the story, it is fascinating.
Well, and I think it's really indicative of how Moses probably felt stuck a lot of his life, right? Stuck between two things, right? So I love how you just said there, that's our Christian life. I'm stuck between who I am and who I've become, because sometimes who we become isn't really who we are, who God created us to be. We can drift away from that. And so, you know, that's what Paul writes a ton about, is the old man and the new man and the putting on the new self. And so it's like becoming who God made you to be is not always who we have become in our flesh.
Well, I think when you're saying that, the same thing that sometimes people I feel like are going to end up in that situation because of, you know, let's say that you're in a marriage and you're not Christ followers, and then one person discovers Christ.
Yeah.
And now I have to reconcile with who I'm becoming and the spouse who I love, you know, or maybe you didn't grow up in a Christian home and you're going, you know, I love my mom and dad. They were a great mom and dad, but they don't have this truth. And it's like, again, feeling torn between two worlds. But one of the things that you touched on in your message that I thought was, you know, it was so good, I wrote it down like 2 or 3 times.
Beautiful.
But
He has quoted it multiple times since Sunday. I
was like,
just
this
want
is
you to
so
know
good.
that.
like, oh, this preacher friend of mine, I'm almost to the point where I can say, you know, it's like
You know, I always
say.
say, yeah.
But you said guilt is an event and shame is an identity. Yep. And so you were talking about how, you know, Moses kills this man and he feels guilty about it and he runs. and you talked about how we can feel guilty about something in a moment, but that shame is when that starts to become our whole life. So tell me a little bit more about that. We'll set that up, and then I want to ask you a question about it.
Yeah. So guilt, like at the most basic level, is not a bad thing. I feel like a movie. Greed is not a good. So
Greed is good.
but that feeling
Yeah.
that Paul then talks about, that sorrow. So the guilt that you feel when you do something wrong, well, that's an indication that, well, you know what is right. Like that
Yes.
there's a healthy understanding of
Right.
good and bad and right and wrong.
And there's a tension between
Yeah.
them.
And so I did something wrong. I feel it. I feel guilty. Not a bad thing.
That can lead you to repentance.
Yeah. So when
Yes.
that guilt says, you messed up, you got to come clean. So then I go to God or I go to another person and I say, hey, I have messed up. Right? And like, I need to get right.
Yeah.
And it leads you to a place of repentance, and then it propels you into the future.
Right.
So you can accomplish the things that God originally planned for you that you kind of derailed, but now you get back on track. When you don't do that, the guilt that you feel then just starts to take root and produce a lot of other feelings and emotions and thoughts, and then shame, which is from the enemy. So he comes in and says, oh yeah, you are bad. No, I did something bad,
Right.
and now I am bad.
Right.
And because I am bad, now I feel ashamed of, because I knew, and now shame becomes my identity, and it propels me backwards away from the plan of God. And so just seeing that with Moses, that I think God could have used Moses 40 or 80 years earlier, but because of shame,
Sure.
it took him down a path that he shouldn't have been on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We talk about this a lot with our kids, where if they're behaving in a certain way, we make sure that we say you're behaving disrespectfully, or you're being disrespectful, not you are disrespectful,
Yeah.
because we don't want them to internalize that and take that on as, well, that's just who I am. I'm just a disrespectful person. I'm just sassy. I'm just, like those negative things. We don't want them to internalize those. So we try to be really careful and say, you're being like this, or you're acting like this. That's not who you are. That's not your identity.
I'm not always successful in the moment, but I have to backtrack later and say that.
Yeah, so we were just recently had conversations about why Christians are viewed as being hypocrites. And it's a lot of that tension, or how this kind of fits with that. It's not that we're perfect, but we pretend to be perfect.
Yeah.
Right? So when we mess up, we won't admit that we messed up. When we sin, we don't want to admit that we sin. And so we hide it. Like we make sure, oh, nobody saw me do that.
Right.
And so I'm good. Well, we know what we did. And so that starts to become our identity. I'm just the phony. I'm the fake. I'm the sinner. I'm the, right. And so therefore we become hypocrites.
Yeah.
Because it's not our true self.
We were talking about this in our life group, and I asked the young adults that are in it, I was saying, like, how many of you sometimes enter a cool down period? Like you do something bad, and rather than going, oh, God, I really messed that up. Like that's that guilt response of, you knock someone over and you go, oh, I'm so sorry. And it's this instantaneous, kind of turning and restitution. It's like, if I just hang my head a little bit for like half an hour, if I wait, it's like 3:00 right now and I messed up. So if I wait till my evening prayers, the Lord will have, like, he'll have time to calm down. Like, I don't know if anybody else feels like that, but I'm like, it's, you get in that shame thing where it's like, if I just kind of ignore this, like it'll just go away, rather than, being able to come to God and go, God's going to understand. He's going to pick me up and scoop me up and go, that's okay. Try again. But you start to, I feel like sometimes that shame rots into, I can't even go to God now because I'm unworthy and he's not going to love me and he's angry with me.
And I think, because I think we get, maybe this is only certain personality types like the one that I have, but we get embarrassed, right? And so I don't want God to see me doing this thing, and if I pretend like it didn't happen, and so for Moses going like, I mean, Moses, I'm sure probably was like, oh no, I'm a murderer. Oh, now I'm a liar too, because I have to,
Well, now I'm a
didn't
coward
tell the
because I ran
truth.
away.
And then, so he didn't tell the truth at first. He got found out. So he's a liar. He's a murderer. He's a coward. He's a, like whatever negative things, there's a snowball effect.
I'm a traitor
from that
to the Israelites
action.
and I'm a traitor to the Egyptians.
I don't fit anywhere. I don't belong. I don't know who I am. So you see how that spirals really fast out of control in his life, leading him into running away.
Your point on that was to protect your identity.
Yeah.
And so tell me a little bit about why that piece is so important, that it's not just about what we do, but it's about our identity.
So for, I don't know, half of my life, probably, maybe more, like I've wrestled with seeing myself the way God sees me. So when I was younger, I was the outcast. I didn't fit with anyone. Like our family was a bit dysfunctional. I had my own issues. And so in school, like I wanted to be, like I can remember in middle school, I wanted to be like in the cool crowd. I wanted to play basketball. I wanted to be the jock, but I wasn't. I was, back in the days, it was like I was the freaker. Like they had the freaks and the jocks, and I was in the freak side, and I had long hair, and so like there were people, like my name was Hey Long Hair. Like that's how I was referred to in middle school and most of high school, and it just became my identity that I'm not one of them. I'm on the outside looking in, and I can remember when I was in high school. I think it was my senior year of high school. There was one of the most popular guys. Like he was a Christian. He was like athletic. He was in drama. He was he was everything. Right? He was the cool guy. And I can remember when he took an interest in me. Like he talked to me, and we became friends. Like we weren't buddy, but we were acquaintances and friends, and it meant the world to me. Like it was amazing that like I'm being seen as something different.
Yeah.
And it seems silly when you look back now as a late 40s, in my later 40s, back to when you're 15 and 16. But I mean, that was powerful.
Yeah. No,
because I had an identity.
That's a good example of, I just was thinking about something for me when I was, younger, when I was a kid. I think identities can feed insecurities a lot of the time, in that if someone gives you a label that you start to internalize, that feeds an insecurity, right? So as you just said about being long hair, right? Yeah. So when I was, we have a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old, and so their teeth fall out and they're awful. Everybody goes through a bad teeth phase, right? Yeah. So when I was in that age range, my teeth fell out, my 2 front teeth came in, and kids are ruthless. I don't know if they were trying to be mean or not, but someone told me that I had beaver teeth. My 2 front teeth were really big, and I had beaver teeth, and I internalized that for a long time and felt very.
Let me see. Oh,
I felt very insecure about my teeth for a long time, and that manifests in like I'm not going to smile, I'm not going to show my teeth, I'm not going to, and so that fed an insecurity.
She was an inch away from becoming goth
in my life for a long time of like how I'm going to act on this, and so I think that those identity pieces, right? If they're good and we internalize them, that's great. Like if we're looking at our kids and saying, you are smart and you are a child of God and you are loved and you are this, then they're going to grow in that confidence. But someone looks at you one time and says, you have beaver teeth, and then you're not going to smile for, the next 5 to 7 years until the rest of your teeth even out, then that feeds an insecurity in your life.
Well, and I think that you see that especially in teens and the kind of preteen is, for a while, one of our daughters, she happened to play soccer, and like she was pretty good at it. And then all of a sudden she wanted to like wear her jersey and take her soccer ball to youth. And we were like, is it a costume night? Like, like, why? And, and it was like, well, I just want to, like, oh, practice in the corner. I'm like, no, that's weird.
But it became her whole identity for a while.
Yeah, I am a soccer player.
Right.
It was just like, but you're not. Like, there's so much more. She's an incredible artist, and she has all these other things that are going on. And I think, like you said, feel like there's some security blanket that is in that. But what I noticed was that didn't necessarily translate, because she was like, I want to be known as a soccer player. I'm like, hey, do you want to go outside and practice?
No. She did not.
Yeah.
It's like,
She did not.
so, but when we're talking about discovering your identity in Christ, how should that translate? Like, because like you said, I feel like it's a lot of the other way around. Like somebody reacts out of an insecurity to say, oh, I lied, I'm a liar, I murdered somebody, I'm a murderer. But what we're saying is that it should work the opposite way, is that it should be reflected on what Christ did for us, not something that we did. And so Christ dies for us, and then that should move the other way. How do you see that translate to life-changing people when they change their identity?
Like, I can just tell you how, like, it impacts me.
Yeah.
Okay. So how it impacts me is when the times when I'm focused and I'm intentional of seeing myself the way Jesus sees me, it's freeing. It's empowering. It gives me boldness and courage and confidence. When I begin to, that becomes clouded, and I revert back to seeing myself the way I see myself internally in the flesh, in how I've always seen myself, then I become weak and timid, and it changes the courage that I have to do the things that I know I should be doing. And so I think our effectiveness in following Christ and fulfilling his plan for us is deeply impacted because of our identity. And the crazy thing is it's all things that we can control.
Right. Right.
But it is powerful. Just one word, when somebody, and part of my issue of how I see myself, I can track back to when I was 5 years old. And I said something in a group setting when I was in kindergarten, and every kid knew the right answer except me. And I said something out loud that was wrong, and everybody laughed.
Yeah.
And so, I just decided I'm not saying anything else. I'm dumb. They all knew, and I didn't. And it seems crazy, but at 5 years old, it started a process of me seeing myself a certain way.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good example. It's really powerful.
Well, and I do. I think a lot of times when people are wrestling with things, you can find pivotal moments like that. A lot of times when we're praying for people, it's like, trying to get over these moments that have somehow become our core memories. It's become a core part of our like you said, it has taken root somewhere and grew into be a part of ourselves. Ironically, we went and saw with our children the new
Inside Out 2.
Inside Out 2.
I knew you were going to say that.
It was this Disney movie, but it was interesting because I'm always like, whenever it's a Disney movie, I'm like, where are we going to go with this? But it was interesting because the new thing in the movie was it said that Riley was figuring out what was the core of her being. And so it was kind of this, and it was all these memories that got planted. And then when they flicked it, it was like a string and it said, I'm a good person, and it was all these different memories. And then through these experiences, she starts to mess up, and these things get dumped into there. And she's like, oh, I'm a phony. Oh, I'm a fake. Oh, I'm and it has to be able to morph and change, but it's about your core identity. And I think that a lot of times, mostly I think that that's for us. But I think there's something powerful in it too when you start to tell other people, where if you go, if you look at somebody else and you say, oh, I'm a soccer fanatic, then they're gonna go, do you want some sporting tickets? And they wouldn't have offered you before, or if you say oh, I'm a Christ follower, and then they go, oh, and they start to ask you about it, because you and I know that if you're somewhere and somebody says, what do you do for a living? And I go, oh, I'm a plumber. They go, oh, that's great. And if I go, I'm a minister, that carries more weight because there's this whole, religious aspect that comes with it. And then it's it changes the dynamic of what's happening in that relationship.
Yeah. So what the challenge is always separating what you do from who you are.
Right.
So when you're talking about, playing soccer, so in our family growing up, all of our kids were very athletic and involved in sports. And we had to constantly tell them, like, you are not a basketball player.
Yeah.
Right? You play basketball, then you're very good. But if you tore your ACL and could no longer play basketball, you're still an amazing person. Right? So we have to be able to separate what we
Yes.
do from who we are, which is hard.
It is.
Like, so if you're a musician, well, what happens if you couldn't play any longer? Do you still have an identity?
Right.
And it goes back to a real quick story. Several years ago, we had a person on our worship team who was the most amazing musician that I've ever heard. Like, he could play guitar. He was an incredible saxophone player, like Kenny G kind of stuff. Like, it was phenomenal. But he didn't want to come to rehearsals. He had other things going and he couldn't make it to the rehearsal night. And so for a little while, we just allowed him to play he showed up on Sundays and he was better than everybody else. And he knew everything, even though he wasn't at rehearsal. But then it started to create some problems because not everybody was at that level. Sure. And so he would be going off on runs and solos and doing things. And everybody's like, oh, what are we doing? What are we doing? And so we just said, hey, on the weeks that you can't be here, then you can't play on Sunday morning. Like, it's not fair to everybody else. They're uncomfortable. And his response was, well, I've never been at a church that didn't want me to be on the worship team.
Yeah.
And I said, well, we want you on the worship team, but you have to come to rehearsal.
To be on the team.
Yeah. And so, and then I said, and here's the deal. You can serve in other places because you're a very talented guy. Like, so you have so many things to offer our church, and you're not just a saxophone player. You're not just a musician. And he said, no, that's who I am. And I said, no, you have so much more to offer.
Yeah.
And I said, what would happen if you were in an accident and you lost a couple of fingers and you couldn't play the saxophone any longer? And he said, I'd put a bullet in my head.
Wow.
And I said, no, you wouldn't. You have so much. He's like, no, I would kill myself.
Wow.
And I'm like, that is. And so we had to have a long conversation. And he ultimately, within a week or two, just said, I'm leaving. I'm going to another church. It was phenomenal to hear him verbalize that I am a musician and nothing more, nothing less. This is my identity.
Yeah. That's that insecurity piece again, where now he has to feed that.
And he wasn't. Like, he had so much to offer our church. He was a great guy, but he saw himself, this is what I do. It's where I get the accolades. Everybody thinks I'm amazing. I've always been the center. And it was sad.
Well, we got to wrap it up here, but I think that is something that's so powerful because, I feel like that's the kind of the edge that Christians have when it comes to hypocrisy and all that. If you just think of yourself as redeemed, that encompasses it, where it's like, I was a sinner and now I don't have to be that way. I'm a new person. We have new life. Sure.
Yeah.
And if we can find our identity there, then
And
we can
sometimes I
pursue Christ.
sin, but
I'm redeemed.
I'm not that person.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we hope you guys join us here next week on the 167, and stay tuned and check out our series, I Feel Stuck, at newlifegardener.com. See you next week. If you enjoyed this episode of the 167, make sure you like, subscribe, follow, get notified, leave a 5-star rating and a positive review. Tell all your friends to listen as well. Make sure you go over to newlifegardener.com and check out all that we have to offer as a church, and check out our messages online as well. Thanks for listening.